This video contains content that may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewers' discretion is advised. Why don't blacks trust vaccinations? That is a good question. It is a question that seems like people refuse to ask. They just keep harping on the facts that we won't take it, but they won't ask, why won't we take it? Let's just say that you have a bad history of being truthful and saying exactly what is in those vials. You came out, gave black men the syphilis disease. Not only that, you sterilized some black women, telling them that they needed these shots. How do we know that this isn't the same thing going on today? And let's not mention the smallpox. But like I said, you have a bad history of telling the truth. And what makes this so fishy, for one, is that you want to give it to black people first. Now, if that don't raise a red flag, I don't know what will. And I heard this, well, I saw this interview where Dr. Fauci was calling himself reasoning with black people to take this vaccination. And when I saw the video, the first problem that I had with the video is, like I said, the lies. The interviewer said that black people trust Dr. Fauci, and that is a flat-out lie. I just don't understand why black people would do that, like they want to try to please this man while he's being interviewed. Why not tell the truth and say that black people do not trust you, Dr. Fauci, and what can you do to gain their trust? I'm going to play this interview, and I will pause it here and there to respond to the things that black people are saying, see, there's something wrong with that.
I'm going to introduce Dr. Anthony S. Fauci for our audience. Dr. Anthony S. Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, where he oversees an extensive research portfolio focused on infectious and immune-mediated diseases. As the longtime chief of the NIAID Laboratory of Immunoregulation, Dr. Fauci has made many seminal contributions in basic and clinical research and is one of the world's most cited biomedical scientists. He was one of the principal architects of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a program that has saved millions of lives throughout the developing world. Most recently, he has led the U.S. government COVID-19 research effort and served on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And on behalf of the Black Coalition Against COVID, Howard University, the Health Alliance Network, and BlackDoctor.org, and other organizations, we welcome you, Tony. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Mr. Lane. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I look forward to the dialogue and the discussion. The comments that we heard from Dr. Frederick ring also true for those of us who are deeply involved in addressing this COVID-19 challenge that we're facing. And that is the very painful disparity, not only in incidence and prevalence of COVID-19 disease among African Americans and people of color, but also the disproportionate burden of serious disease as reflected in increased hospitalizations to the tune of 4 times the number of hospitalizations per 100,000 population among African Americans compared to the population in general, and at least twice as many deaths. These are things that relate to so many factors that I hope we get a chance to discuss this evening so that we could learn from you and do better in how we address so many of these difficult issues that are right now, I believe, at the forefront of what we are obligated to do with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll stop there and be happy to engage in discussion with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for making time to really talk to and have a conversation with the Black community. And one thing that I have learned in terms of some poll taking, even though there is some trepidation of African Americans in terms of taking the vaccine or participating in vaccine trials, still African Americans do trust Dr. Fauci. And so that's actually a very good sign. So
Lie number one. I mean, if you can't trust the interviewer and he's black, how can you trust the whole interview? Because I never heard of this guy for one. And why would Dr. Fauci appear on his show? I mean, we have Tariq Nasheed, somebody like that, but, you know, hey, they pick and choose who they want to speak with. And he's definitely not speaking for the black community, because the black community, we don't trust you, Dr. Fauci, because you work for them people. And you are those people.
I want to start off by letting you know that a lot of African Americans do trust, because you're very forthright based on science, and we try to follow the science. However, I do want to put some things into context as we start our conversation. A very recent Pew Research poll and other polls taken, so for example, blackdoctors.org also took a poll on their website, but they have indicated a reluctance by the Black community to participate in vaccine trials or to take the vaccine once it is available. The immediate question is around mistrust of the state, mistrust of white people, mistrust of the medical community, and so on. You generally hear of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and Henrietta Lacks, but it is rooted much deeper. From slavery to Jim Crow, to the targeting of Black leaders in the 60s, to police brutality and uneven court justice, to Black Lives Matter, and now to the disproportionate impact of COVID on the Black community. While at the same time, there is recognition of Black progress made in society, not just in arts, entertainment, and sports, but also in education, business, and science. The poll shows an almost even split between Black people who will take the vaccine and those that won't. And it cuts across economic positions. In addition to all of those issues, all of those, peeling back that layer of the onion, the whole country has been fed misinformation and sometimes outright lies about COVID-19 and vaccination. So my first question, which is a tough question, is why should Black people trust this process?
Well, Ambrose, I think the first thing that we need to appreciate, those of us who are trying to convince our African American brothers and sisters to trust the process, because it's ultimately to the benefit of the life and safety of the individuals as well as your families and your entire community, is that to first understand the reasons and empathize with the reasons for the mistrust, as opposed to pushing back against the mistrust. And one of the ways that I try to do it is to try and dissect out not the fundamental core of the distrust, but take the particular situation you're dealing with now and say, let's try and start off on an even footing. What are the reasons for this particular situation, namely the vaccine, that you have reluctance and skepticism about getting vaccinated? And I think there are two major issues that when I explain them to my friends and colleagues and people who I don't know in the African American community and the community of people of color, is that the speed with which this was done. Isn't there something reckless about that? Well, the first thing is to point out that the speed has nothing to do with compromising safety or scientific integrity. It's due to the extraordinary and exquisite advances in vaccine platform technology, which has allowed us to do things in weeks to months that formerly took years, several years, and to engage in a dialogue and talk about that, as opposed to just feeding it to them. The second thing is, well, how do I know that this vaccine is really safe and is really effective? Is this just some government ploy? We've been fooled before by the federal government. You gave some very cogent instances just a moment ago. Well, or is it the pharmaceutical companies that want to get rich over us? Well, we can address both of those. First of all, the determination of whether a vaccine is truly safe and effective is not made by the company indirectly, and the government doesn't see the data at all until way down the process. The data first come to a totally independent data and safety monitoring board that is made up of experienced clinicians, scientists, vaccinologists, statisticians, and ethicists. They look at the data and they independently determine if it's safe and effective. If it is, they show it to the company. The company then analyzes it and presents it to the FDA and applies for an emergency use authorization or outright approval. The experienced career scientists, not the politicians, the career scientists in the FDA examine the data and then, in association with their own advisory committee, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, or VRPAC, those individuals then advise the FDA. When they then say that the vaccine is safe and effective, I will tell you all that I myself will be perfectly comfortable in taking the vaccine, and I would recommend it to my family. So it really is a process of trying to dissect out what the reasons for the skepticism are and to try and address them individually, fully respecting the underlying skepticism that you have every reason to have for historical reasons, to balance those two. That's how I would approach it.
I did not hear one thing in that speech that will make me say I trust the vaccinations. The man asked you, and you gave a bunch of talk and gibberish. If you want to really prove to us about this vaccination, you take it first.
So in that conversation, in what I mentioned earlier is that there have been advances in society, including African Americans in science. And my understanding is that that independent monitoring board has African American scientists on it. In fact, one works with you directly. I don't know if she's on the board, but we know that we have an African American scientist that works with you directly.
Correct.
And so this is, and talk, you can speak about her work, but also how important that is in terms of breaking down these myths in the historic trepidation, because it's a new day. It's not 1930 anymore. This is 2000. This is 2020. And so the times have changed, and the input of African American scientists in this process is much deeper than one might think. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think the example that you gave, Ambrose, is an excellent example. The very vaccine that's one of the two that has absolutely exquisite level, 94 to 95% efficacy against clinical disease and almost 100% efficacy against serious disease, that has shown to be clearly safe. That vaccine was actually developed in my institute's Vaccine Research Center by a team of scientists led by Dr. Barney Graham and his close colleague, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, or Kizzy Corbett. Kizzy is an African-American scientist who is right at the forefront of the development of the vaccine.
There is another lie. It's not exactly a lie, but he's not telling the truth about Kizmekia. See, we as black people, we know that these people that you prop up, you may call them African Americans because they're from Africa and now they live in America, but they're not the African Americans that you are addressing. Those are not those African Americans. And sometimes I really get offended by that when you say African Americans, because who are you referring to? And blacks here in America, we have not one thing against Africans or any other black people. What we do have a problem with is people that kind of throw us up under the bus and will work with people that don't like you or us. And I think I heard Kizmekia talking before, and I just really not feeling this Kizmekia lady. And so if you can't really be truthful about anything, how can we trust this vaccination? If you are a person that is living here in America and you're black, and your ancestors were not here during slavery and were slaves, you don't count. I mean, I hate to put it like that, or sound mean, but you can't speak for us. You don't represent us. You represent yourself. You trying to prop yourself up and get something in for your family and the people where you're from. So by you saying that you have this Kizmekia lady working with this guy, that doesn't mean a thing to us. Because a lot of these immigrants will work with you to eliminate us so they can get in.
So the first thing you might want to say to my African-American brothers and sisters is that the vaccine that you're going to be taking was developed by an African-American woman. And that is just a fact. I mean, that is a fact. And I think that's some of the things that people don't fully appreciate.
Exactly what are those African American doctors? What are they doing for black people? I mean, you said that we have all these underlying health conditions and how poor our health is. Why is that? If we have all these great black doctors and scientists, why haven't they figured these things out? Why we suffer from high blood, hypertension, mental issues, and drug addictions? What is the cause of these things? Because that is not normal behavior. If these black doctors are so great, why aren't they working for black people?
Absolutely, and thank you for that information, because one of my residents, as a matter of fact, Mary Douglas Brown, who is 70 years old, lives in Ward 7 in Washington, D.C., had a question where she asked, number one, if I had COVID before, do I still get the vaccine? And let me just explain some of this. She's a breast cancer survivor, and she also has other health conditions, and is kind of worried about taking the vaccine. So number one, if she had COVID, does she take the vaccine still? And two, will it have an impact on some of the other issues of health that she has?
Well, the answer is, even if she's had COVID-19 disease, it is recommended that she does get the vaccine. For the simple reason, it is not clear how long immunity to getting infected lasts.
There will be some negative reactions to this COVID vaccination. If Dr. Fauci is unclear about how long the immunity lasts, what else are they not clear about? Everything that you say is pretty much guesswork because you really don't know. You haven't tested everybody with this coronavirus vaccination. And I saw that guy that was in the hospital and suffered with the coronavirus. You didn't say you gave him any medicine, but I'm quite sure that you did. So one thing about this interview I'm noticing that is that Dr. Fauci he's too fluent with his speech. It's like he's had this planned out. Sometimes I think he's reading, he's not just speaking from the heart. I really don't trust this interview. It's like this is some type of way to convince black people to take this coronavirus vaccination. I mean, there's still some questions that I think that should be asked that is not being asked. And there are some statements that should be made that is not being made. The first question is I would ask is that why are you coming to the black community first? Lead by example. Why don't you come to the white community first? And then after we see our taking is okay, then we might take it. But why would you address us first?
Typically, when you get infected, you're immune from reinfection for a period of time. It could be lifelong, like with measles. It could be 10 years or so, as with other diseases, or it could be relatively short.
See, there you go, talking crooked again. Nothing definite. Could be lifetime. Could be 10 years. Could be 2 days. The same thing goes for this vaccination. It might work. It might not work. It might kill you.
The history of coronaviruses indicates that the durability of immunity is a bit on the short side, measured like maybe in a year or two, and not in decades and decades.
Now, how would he know that when the disease has only been out since November of last year? So what would it... We don't trust you, Dr. Fauci, because you're lying.
So that's the reason why we make no distinction. If a person gets infected and then wants to get the vaccine, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't have any negative impact on other underlying conditions. For example, like the woman who might be a breast cancer survivor.
See, the reason a lot of these tests take years to conduct is because that's how long it takes to get around to everybody to test it. You test one or two people and you think it's going to work for everyone. With that, you know that's not true. So we're not going to be your guinea pigs, man, because we already know that you have not tested this long enough to see how it's going to work on everyone.
That's good stuff.
Ambrose, if I can jump in here, just as a follow-up question, Dr. Fauci, when people do get the vaccine, what is your anticipation in terms of their ability to return to work, to be out in the community, and what would be your expectation of them in terms of wearing masks, washing their hands, socially distancing, until that recommendation goes away, so that people are clear about what type of a panacea and when that panacea is represented in taking a vaccine?
Well, that's a very good question, Dr. Frederick. So first of all, when you get vaccinated, it is very clear of the 30,000 people in the Moderna study and the 44,000 people in the Pfizer study, the incidence of severe adverse events is negligible. So we're not expecting any issues that would interfere with a person's going to work. What the vaccine does have commonly is what we call reactogenicity, which means that a substantial proportion of people will get a sore arm, maybe a bit of aches and feeling a little bit of malaise. A small percentage also gets fever, and that could be uncomfortable, but it's not a large percentage. All of that almost invariably disappears within 24 to 36 hours. So someone might feel a bit uncomfortable about going to work, but generally it doesn't interfere with your function. You take 2 Tylenol, and it really, for the most part, takes care of the ache and the feeling of malaise. The second question you asked is that until we get the level of infection in the community to such a low level that it is no longer a threat to anyone, in essence, almost eliminating the threat of infection, that even if you are vaccinated, it is recommended that you follow the public health recommendations of wearing a mask, staying distant, avoiding congregate settings and crowds.
I want to know if Dr. Fauci is a religious person. From the way he speaks, I think that Dr. Fauci is an atheist.
And washing your hands often for a number of reasons. One, you may not be fully protected yourself. And two, the vaccine could prevent you from getting clinical disease, but not necessarily protect you against getting infected.
Now, that is double talk. I don't understand. What is the use of taking the vaccination if you said that although you take the vaccination, it will not prevent you from being infected? That don't make any sense at all.
So you could get infected and have absolutely no symptoms, but you might have virus in your nasopharynx, even though you don't have any symptoms. So you want to make sure that you do something like wear a mask, like keep your distance, so you don't inadvertently infect someone else.
Why is there a need for a second dose, booster dose, to make the vaccine effective?
That's just the way the immune system responds. We know from practice and experience that with some types of vaccines, you require a prime, which gets all of those immune cells sort of triggered and ready. Then you come in with a boost, and the response really takes off. So, based on considerable experience, we know that a prime followed in 28 days by a boost gives you a much more potent and durable response than just a single injection.
Who wants to take the first one? And you're talking about taking another one, a booster? Well, that little talk you had in this interview, I hate to tell you, Fauci, it didn't do any good. We, the black people, we think that you are just lying. And this is some type of setup interview. I mean, there are other guys that I think I would trust a lot better in this interview, like maybe Phil Advice, Tariq Nasheed, or Zoe Williams, somebody else that's really going to ask you some stiff questions, and not these Breakfast Club type people. If these people would have just came out and said that, hey, look, something has been released into the atmosphere, and you must continue to wear these masks because we don't know how it's spreading, but we do know it's out there, and you must protect yourself. If you would have came out saying something like that, well, maybe we could follow you. But you are not being honest about this coronavirus. There are too many unanswered questions. And then when they ask you a question, you call yourself speaking over someone's head, speaking a lot of gibberish. I mean, since it came from Asia, why don't you try it on all the Asian Americans first? Why the so-called African Americans? So that's one problem I have with this coronavirus is that they said it originated in Wuhan, China. How did it make it all the way to the black community when blacks don't go to China? The closest relationships we have with Asians are from the Asian proprietors, the ones that own these little grocery stores, or these nail shops, the other little businesses and establishments they have within the black community. Is that how it was spread to black people? Hey, that request is denied. Test it on the Asian Americans first. And after you finish with the Asian Americans, then test it on all the politicians. Then if they don't pass out and die, then we might take it. Because I really don't trust you. Even if you say that you're going to take this coronavirus vaccination, How do we know it's not some type of placebo? Just something you just put in there just to play it out, because we're not scientists. We can't go in those vials and test it and see exactly what it is. We have to take your word. And that's one thing that we just cannot do, is take your word, because your word is not good. You constantly lie to black people. You know, that's why they really wanted Donald Trump about the seat, is because Donald Trump he's like an outsider. Even the Democrats and all of them tried to get, hey man, you got to do it this way. But Donald Trump, by him not being a politician, he's going to do it his way. And Donald Trump saw some mess going on with this coronavirus. You know, I understand he just can't speak on certain things by him being a president. But that's why I think they got him up out of there, because he just wasn't playing ball. And we just don't trust this coronavirus vaccination. And then you say we'll have to take a booster shot. And then you say that, oh, there's no guarantee that it will prevent us from being infected. We pass. Whenever someone brings up other issues that are plaguing America, they want to make it as if that you are disrespecting coronavirus. Hey, we don't have time to talk about that. We have to worry about the coronavirus. But there was a problem with homelessness. And there's a problem with hunger, joblessness. There are many problems that go along with this coronavirus that were going on before the coronavirus. You just can't sweep it up under the rug just because of the coronavirus. And you want to address black people about the coronavirus, but not the other issues concerning black people, the one that we want to talk about. But you don't want to talk about that. That's why you keep pushing this coronavirus talk. And we're not taking these vaccinations, and may God have mercy on the ones that do. You know, I read that they have Navy aircraft carriers on the east and the west coast. Exactly what is America preparing for? When they built these border walls, the walls will not only keep people out, but it will keep people in. It's just real sad that my people are sleeping while others are wide awake and are at work trying to push forward an agenda. You know, people might say that, hey, man, if they try that, this or that is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen, because you people are too cowardly to do anything. You're just too cowardly. You don't know how to stand up and speak for yourselves. So to address these people who want us to take this coronavirus vaccination, how can we trust someone that has a long history and a record of being not trustworthy? As the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.